Wow, what a challenge discussion for 2 days at least, and we need to put it in 45, 50 minutes. So I'll go straight to President Duda, if you'll allow me to ask you the first question. Well, there's been a strong signal coming yesterday from Europe. The sanctions have been approved, the loan has been approved, and Europe is clearly gearing up now with a new reality without Viktor Orban to put more pressure on Russia. You have been recently doing quite a lot of trips and being present in Washington, and we all know you have a very special relation with President Trump. You know him very well. Could you tell us what's your readout on the U.S. in this matter? Can we see pressure coming through the U.S. on the Kremlin, on Putin, considering, of course, what we've seen in the last years?
First, good afternoon to everyone. First, I would like to say that I was interviewed. I was asked by journalists today, what's my opinion about this yesterday's very important decision taken by the EU members, and I said, I'm absolutely very satisfied that this 20th package of sanctions against Russia is now valid, yes, and it's really important that we will introduce these measures to create all these tools we have and we are using to stop Russian aggression against Ukraine, that we will have this new possibility to make it more efficient. So this is the first element. But you are asking me about the United States. This is I think, but the best answer will be, we'll see. We'll see, because, I know President Donald Trump, I know the President of the United States, I talked with him many times, and so I have my expectations. I think I understand what he is trying to do, what he's trying to achieve. Sometimes it looks strange, and sometimes it's quite difficult to recognize what would be the real benefit for Ukraine and for the free world from that policy. But I don't want to speculate, but I have my own concept what he wants to achieve and what is the way to gain this target. So we'll see.
Thank you very much, Minister. If I can move to you, we've had the packages approved. We've had the good news coming from Cyprus, but can you tell us, where does Ukraine stand right now? How's the strength of the economy? What does this package mean, and what are the next steps forward to actually use it to build more pressure against Russia, to build more resilience? Please tell us.
First of all, let me thank organizers of this conference. I am honored to be here. It's an important event, a traditional important event. I think that as far as I'm concerned, yesterday's decisions was very important and give us necessary confidence that funds which is available for Ukraine will come. And now we should make necessary steps to make it happen, because it's not unconditional, not conditional. Some of them conditional, some of them not. For example, military expenses are non-conditional, and it's important for us to secure 28.3 billion euro without any conditions to procure what is necessary for Ukraine defense. And it gives us some fiscal space in our budget, because we can relocate money which is we plan to spend for drones. Now we expecting that we can procure these drones using this money, which will be available in the European budget. But it's not all story. Another package is 16.7 billion euro. It's budget support. Part of this money will come through European facility with necessary and important legislation which we need to adopt in the Parliament. The list of laws already developed and will be developed further. And another part is a macro-financial assistance with additional reforms and conditionalities which we need to implement. And I believe that it's the fact that Europeans provided us this green light also give our parliamentarians, members of our parliaments, necessary conditions to be stronger in their ability to pass all necessary legislation through the parliament. Because government expected, and we're doing our best in our cooperation with parliament to make it happen. And of course, if you ask me if we fully secure, probably for this year, yes, but we would like to be back for December 2025, when it was discussion about reparation law. We would like to, again, to press this issue on the agenda. It's important that frozen Russian assets is still under debates. It's important that our ministries, my colleagues' ministries, discuss this issue and find some solutions. We have some proposals. Intermediate solutions can be found when we transmit or shift some money which is now located in different residential or countries of regions in one specific account under jurisdictions of European Commissions. It helps us to go further, and I believe it's fair enough for us to demand, I would want to stress, to demand some actions to happen right now.
Can I just follow on this point? It's very important. Do you believe that this is your best bet? Is this the strategy that there is a good chance now in the political climate that those assets can be used and can be mobilized?
You know, climate is something which is changing, and you were just asking President Duda what's changing. There are so changes in the world that probably that I believe that our European colleagues should become brave enough to make further steps towards this.
Thank you very much. Ambassador, if I may come to you and ask you a bit of a follow-up. We've heard on the European perspective, we've heard a little bit from President Duda on Washington and unpredictability. Well, let me ask you from your couple of hats that you've had, if I may say so, what would you say in the conditions you see today would be an optimal way forward to construct a pressure mechanism against Russia economically with what's right now on the table to make it really effective?
Well, thank you. And I will answer that question. Let me first say thank you to Andrzej for bringing all of this together, bringing this forum together again. I think it's very important that people come to Ukraine, they see with their own eyes, they listen to people, and also that we can share some perspectives of how we are dealing with Ukraine abroad. I think it's all very important. Second thing, I think that some things have changed in the past few months that are in Ukraine's favor. Ukraine's own defense capabilities, and particularly the ability to produce long-range strike capability inside Russia, is very important. And it has had an impact on Russia's oil export capacity, which means that Russia is not benefiting of the windfall of higher oil prices as much as they might have done. And I think that's significant. That will mean more when oil prices go down again. So that's one. Another is Russia supposedly in a spring and summer offensive, and yet Ukraine has held that off and even advanced on the ground. So I think that is a change. And certainly Vladimir Putin and Gerasimov will notice this, that they're not getting anywhere. I also think that the numbers, people talk about the math of this war. We have 90 billion euros in loan plus other assistance from the EU to Ukraine every year. And Putin is now burning through his hard resources in order to keep things going, keep the war going and starving the Russian economy. And he's not able to replace the number of soldiers that he's losing on the battlefield month to month. So a lot of things have turned in Ukraine's favor. Now, I bring all that up because I don't see President Trump changing. I think he has firmly established that he just wants an end to the war under any circumstances. He wants a peace agreement. And he's not going to walk away from that perspective. But the reality is Putin does not want a peace agreement. He wants to keep fighting and keep attacking. And I don't think he will ever accept that Ukraine is a legitimate, sovereign, independent country, that President Zelensky is the legitimate leader of a free Ukraine, and that there is a permanent international border between Russia and Ukraine. He'll never go for those things. So where we end up is drifting towards a ceasefire, where Putin can't keep it going the way he's doing it now. He will need a ceasefire. Ukraine is ready for a ceasefire. And then as soon as we get to something like that, we all work as hard as we can to prolong it, to deepen it, to strengthen Ukraine economically, militarily, structurally, institutionally, all of those things. And I think we are headed that way. Now, to your question, what we should be doing is identifying those pressure points that I mentioned. The finances available to the Kremlin, the functioning of the Russian economy, and his ability to sustain his military operations. And we should be doing everything possible to target those. So we should be doing secondary sanctions on Russian oil, not lifting sanctions on Russian oil at sea. We should be trying to get everybody off of Russian oil and gas faster than they are currently planning to do it. We should be assisting Ukraine with long-range capabilities, including Tomahawks, for example. Now, I don't see those things happening, and so I think this process that I mentioned of getting to a ceasefire will take longer than it needs to, but we will still get there.
Thanks very much for your points. I want to now reach out online to Minister Gylfadóttir. I'm sorry, hard to pronounce. I would like to ask about, jumping to accountability, and probably the most important element on everybody's mind is the situation of Ukrainian children. We all know that it was the base for all the legal actions undertaken internationally, but we also know that there's some activity. Could you tell us where we stand? What is the situation, and what are the prospects of having tens of thousands, I think estimates up to 35,000 children returned?
First of all, thank you for having me on, even though I'm online. I would like to start by saying we all know that history will judge us by our collective response to the Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. And in this response, I believe we share a common purpose to ensure that justice mechanisms protect the most vulnerable, especially children, and to uphold the rule of law. What we need to remind ourselves and realize and be very open about, that the forcible transfer, abduction and deportation of children is not an abstract concept. They are a concrete and grave breaches of international law that demand accountability. We also have to understand that this is not something that happens to a country when it's fighting a war, but it is state-planned, systematic and strategic actions from Russia. The accountability part is, in my mind, one of the most fundamental aspects of this war. The Council of Europe is I would say, leading in a way in that regard. First of all, the register of damage for Ukraine, which has recently opened the claims category for the illegal transfer of children and plays a key role in documenting harm and will contribute to the future International Claims Commission. The European Court of Human Rights, of course, also remains a crucial mechanism, and in July 2025 judgment, it found Russia responsible for systematic violations, including the unlawful transfer to the Russian Federation of Ukrainian children. And we then also have the consultation group inside the Council of Europe. So this is all extremely important. The special tribunal, we're working on it. Countries are joining, and that is fundamentally important. I have to say that when it comes to accountability, in my opinion, that is not something that Ukraine should have to ask for on the list of support that they need. This is a fundamental thing for the civilized world. This is a fundamental thing for Europe to uphold and protect and hold them accountable for their war crimes and action. We know that we have already over 2,000 children that have been brought back to Ukraine. We don't know the exact number of the stolen children to Russia, but we also have to keep in mind that we have 1.5 million children in the temporarily occupied territories in Ukraine. And they, of course, we do not have the overview and information that we need. We do know that they are in danger. We do know that they are being brainwashed. And we have to have that all in mind with the highest regard and that big number. Accountability must also be linked with a safe return, rehabilitation, reintegration for children. And the Ukrainians are doing an outstanding and excellent job in this regard, but they do need our support. They do need the human resources, the infrastructure, the financial support. And this is, of course, a key focus in Ukraine, both from ministries, institutions, and the NGOs. So when people ask me, what can we do to help? I would like to say, well, we can actually support the NGOs and the institutions that are bringing the children back, because they need our support. And when we feel, limited in action in bringing them back, there is a way to assist, and that is to assist the people and the stakeholders that are actually bringing them back. What will happen in the coming future with regards to peace negotiations and so on, I do not know. But we cannot talk about just and sustainable peace without being able to make sure that these children are brought back to Ukraine, to their motherland, and to assist them in reintegration, rehabilitation. And therefore, this has to be a key focus. And my final point, we have to make sure that when we talk about reconstruction and rebuild Ukraine, it cannot only be about, bridges, roads, and infrastructure. It also has to be about the people and the future of Ukraine, which are the children of Ukraine.
Thank you very much. I'll come back in the second round on important follow-up on this, but I want to come to David now, if I may. And David is a partner at Burlington and Covington and Burlington, who is the official partner of this session, and have done incredible work on the sanctions and on accountability. David, I wanted to ask you, what is your sense of effectiveness when it comes to the whole international sanctions regime, if I may call it, or establishment? And what are the key challenges you've been observing with all of your practice? And how do you think it's best to address them?
Sure. Thank you very much. People hear me? Yeah. Okay. Let me make two observations. Firstly, one of the key objectives of the international sanctions regime is to constrain the Russian economy, and particularly through sales of Russian hydrocarbons. One of the developments from the 20th sanctions package, which we were all feverishly reading late last night, was that there's a political commitment on the part of the EU to move away from the so-called Russian oil price cap. The price cap was a mechanism through which sanctions law encouraged the continued sale of Russian oil, but regulating the price of that oil. The 20th package seeks to begin a process that moves away from that and toward a complete ban on maritime services in relation to Russian oil and Russian oil products. So that's a shift from an effort to try to regulate the price of Russian oil to a strategy that seeks to regulate the volume of Russian oil exports. It'll be important to see whether that is actually followed through. What we see in the EU 20th package is a commitment on the part of the EU to discuss that issue at the G7 and see if an agreement can be reached at the G7 on it. This is an area where the EU and the UK do not need the United States necessarily to be effective. It'd be great if the US came along with it. But if the EU, the UK, and Japan in particular are able to implement a maritime services prohibition, that will make it very difficult for Russia to export the volumes that it exports out of the Baltic ports, because they need to have the right insurance to do that. And it would be very difficult logistically for them to shift supplies that are going from the Baltic ports to other export ports. So that would be one element of European sanctions, UK, and I think the Japanese would also be an important element of this, that could be effective if there's a political commitment among the EU, the UK, and Japan to do that. In a similar vein, in the 20th package, you see an increased focus on eliminating LNG exports from Russia into the EU. There's actually been a pretty favorable story in terms of European dependency on Russian oil over the last 4 years. Russian LNG exports to the EU have basically been flat since the beginning of the war. There now is a commitment to end those exports into the EU by January 1st, 2027. If you combine that with similar measures in the UK to restrict transportation services in relation to LNG, that presents a very significant issue for Russia in terms of its LNG supplies globally. It will be left basically to shift all of those supplies to China, and there will ultimately be a price discount if they have only really one export market to sell those products to. So that will be an important series of developments with regard to energy. Now, you've asked about effectiveness of sanctions. If I could make just one additional point. On the last panel, there was a discussion about the role of China, particularly with regard to export controls. Russian weapon systems, including missiles and drones, continue to use US components, EU components, and UK components. 80% of those components are being supplied to Russia through China. The regulations as they exist today are sufficient to inhibit the indirect supply of those products to Russia through China or other markets. The EU and the UK governments and other governments around the world have, I think, not been as effective as they potentially could be in information sharing and allowing exporters in Europe, in the United Kingdom, and elsewhere to understand how to trace potential issues of risk in relation to diversion. That's going to be a big issue, I think, where there could be improvement without having to amend the sanctions regulations, simply increasing resourcing and the effective implementation of the existing sanctions regulations.
Thanks very much for this. And we'll follow up. Interestingly, as you mentioned, this 20th package, I think there are provisions to stop exporting some technology to Central Asian countries, to Kyrgyzstan, which is a big change, but still doesn't resolve the China issue, of course. But Yulia, let me come to you, and you've been doing incredible work, as we all heard, in terms of unpacking everything that's in the sanctions regime. But what I wanted to ask you is, how is it truly impacting the Russian economy? What is the state of the Russian economy? And are the measures which are taken internationally truly hurting them? Or is it really a lukewarm approach?
Thank you so much. I wish we had this conversation like a month ago. In that time, my statement would be much more aspiring in terms of results of the sanctions, because actually what we saw that Russia entered 2026 on the verge of stagnation, and the accumulated problems and structural challenges in their economy reached to that level that it's hard for them to hide them, because it's all over, and basically only military boosted sectors are growing and helping to show at least 1% growth, while all other sectors are under the pressure, especially they are fighting for labor forces, they are competing with each other for investments, they are basically blocked from financing because the central bank keeps monetary policy extremely high and tight to keep under the control inflation. And I believe that where I can shout out to the US sanctions is actually Rosneft and Lukoil sanctions, because this is the first time when we have seen that indeed Russian export volumes and production volumes of oil have decreased in February, and this results also not only with tremendous increase in discount on Russian oil, but also another sign was that Russia was stockpiling oil on market, meaning that they were not able to find their consumers, and India was increasingly shifting away from Russian oil. And that's why the outlook in February was much more depressing, and our team believed that with that pace of sanctions, with making sure that it is properly enforced, that that companies that we already identified that replaced Rosneft and Lukoil export volumes also follow and targeted with the secondary sanctions, we had all the chances to push Russian export volumes below the $150 billion, and this is the margin where Russia usually goes into significant economic crisis. However, we now all live in new reality, and Russia is clearly benefiting from the high prices. Here, I will just say that it's very good that Ukraine has the ability to impose own kinetic sanctions. Our assessment that for the first 2 weeks of attacks on Baltic and Black Sea ports, it costed Russia at least 2.2 billion of lost export revenues. However, I would say, and I am luckily not acting or former representative of the government, we are super dissatisfied with the recent decision on prolongation of the waiver on Russian oil, because in fact it has done nothing to improve the situation on the global market unless it just helped Russia to get more revenues.
Oh, thanks very much for that outlook, and we can clearly see how events in the Middle East are impacting this situation. President Duda, if I may come back to you, we've talked quite a little bit here about accountability and justice, and I'm wondering, what's your readout when it comes to a potential ceasefire and further peace negotiations? Do you believe there is a way to hold Russia accountable and to have some justice for Ukraine for what Russia has done? Is there a perspective for that, or do you believe we're only forcing it to a ceasefire?
Thank you for that question. Very interesting and very important. I think that we should talk about two kinds of responsibility. Yes, one responsibility is the financial responsibility. So Russia should pay for all damages in Ukraine, for the recovery of Ukraine, not only in the meaning of the simple reconstruction, yes, rebuilding Ukraine, but also recovery Ukraine in this broader sense, also for example, for some psychological and medical care and assistance Ukrainians as a society, Ukrainian veterans need and will need in the future. So this is one this financial responsibility. This is one element. But the second element is war crimes, because we have had, and we still have, and we will unfortunately probably will have a lot of war crimes here in Ukraine committed by Russian soldiers, but not only soldiers, also by Russian authorities, by Russian leaders. And this is completely different problem, this responsibility, I think that we should consider to create some tribunal, dedicated international tribunal, dedicated for that investigations and for that trials and for that responsibility.
Well, thank you very much for that answer, and hopefully the efforts underway will be successful. Minister Marchenko, looking at what we've discussed on the sanctions, and I'm coming back to the pressure on Russia, which probably one of the key pressures is Ukraine being an effective economy. But in a situation where we've, for many years continue, which is a possible scenario, in those conditions that we see right now, what is your vision? What is the vision of Ukraine actually being able, in those conditions, to grow as an economy, to innovate, and for livelihoods to be at a certain level?
Well, now we can compare ourselves with what we were in 2022, and now we feel ourselves much stronger from different perspectives. Of course, war made the devastating effect on our economy, and last winter was very harsh. Russia constantly trying to destroy our heating, electricity infrastructure. It's a challenge for us right now. It's the biggest possible challenge to prepare ourselves for the next heating season. But as economically and military and from budget perspective, we are now in a much stronger condition than we were in 2022 and probably even in 2023. I can explain it from several perspectives. In 2022, our military output, joint military output for all our military industries was around $1 billion. For this year perspective, we have 55 billion. It's important to admit that the great demand from the government, from military machine to introduce new technologies, to speed up a process of productions, create some conditions for development. Of course, we now are only in initial stage, so it's not developed yet, despite the fact that we spent tremendous resources to the military industry. I believe it's an initial stage of development, but the tempo, the speed on how it develops is very, very unusual. Of course, it's usual for countries in war, but it's unusual for peaceful countries. It means that we created some basis for future, conditions for future economic growth and development. And if you're talking about budget perspective, from budget perspective, our conditions is quite strong and secured, as I mentioned in my previous statement, not only because of support from external partners, but also for strong revenue mobilizations. We can meet target which our partners praised us to meet. We can reach tax to GDP ratio this year 38.5%. In comparison with 2025 is 35%. It means that we increasingly create conditions for revenue mobilizations. It means that economically we are, despite this suffering and striving, we are resilient enough. We are flexible and adaptable. And of course, there are a lot of tiredness, a lot of frustration. It's all some consequences of war. But despite all of this, we have a very good perspective. If all conditions will be at the same as we see right now, and even in worse conditions, we are capable to quickly adapt. And this is something we can share with our partners and neighbors. This quick adaptability for different harsh conditions is a key strength of Ukraine. And I believe we can share this experience with countries which is our partners. We can share that it's not only tools which we can operate. It's not only drones, for whole of my respect for drones Ukrainians produce, but it's our experience in a battlefield and experience to withstand economically, because challenges which we overcome during this year was so great that we are capable for something bigger, and we know how to adapt and how to react and how to prepare a new vision for world which is not so clear and transparent right now. So it's very vulnerable world we see right now, and I don't think it will change significantly in the nearest future.
Would you say that those innovations that you mentioned could be a strong contribution, a strong argument in the accession process to the EU?
Of course, starting from last year, we promote in security payment for security perspectives. Should be joint beneficial for us in Europe if Ukraine's expeditionary forces will be allocated throughout Europe to make in all conditions possible to secure a European compact.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. David, if I could come back to you, we've talked quite a bit about the structure of the sanctions regime, the effectiveness. I want to talk a little bit about evasions. You know, for instance, we've got the shadow fleet. How do you see different activities that should be undertaken to prevent evasion of sanctions in the current regime?
Well, I think the enforcement of the sanctions that are in place, again, becomes an important element to this. So if we look at, the shadow fleet is not really an evasion as such. I mean, it's a deliberate and inconspicuous effort to choose a pathway to supply energy products that doesn't touch upon the jurisdictional reach of the European or the U.S. sanctions. One of the reasons why the price cap mechanism has been so difficult is that it is very easy to evade. So you just simply falsify pricing documents, you manipulate transfer pricing, you do all sorts of other things. In the absence of a very, very robust enforcement mechanism around the price cap, it's unlikely to be very effective. And there actually haven't been any enforcement actions in relation to the price cap over the last 4 years. So that's why there is some attractiveness to the notion of moving away from that more kind of nuanced, trying to balance different issues, sanctions regime that involves lots of complexity, and moving more to a bright line standard that just says, look, you're prohibited from using our insurance, you're prohibited from using our insurance brokers, our technical support with regard to the maritime transfer of oil, whole stop. That's an easier standard for companies to implement and an easier standard to enforce. With regard to evasion concerning export controls, again, I think the key issue is information, right? So you have a deficit in the sense that an exporter of goods from the UK or the EU has no intention for those goods to end up in Russia and doesn't want the goods to end up in Russia. What we hear time and time again, this is the example that constantly comes up, we're just supplying these goods to an independent third-party purchaser in China, and we have no idea where the goods go. And by the way, we have a clause in our contract that says, Chinese purchaser, please agree that you won't redistribute these products to Russia. That creates an information problem. And companies are unlikely to be able to bridge that information gap on their own. And that's, again, where I think regulators, so like sanctions regulators in Europe have done a great job over the last 4 years from a standing start where they didn't have any regulations that looked anything like this. They need to start to share more information and develop technologies to be able to share that information effectively among exporters. It's through effective information and effective coordination between governments and the private sector that these evasion-type issues are addressed.
Thanks. Thanks very much. Yulia, if I can come to you also on that, and I know something David has been working also on, but the question of private assets, private Russian assets, do you think that they could be mobilized and used in favor of bringing in resources for Ukraine? And also, could you comment on an optimal model for sanction enforcement, for preventing of evasions and pressure being applied?
Thank you. That would be a tough one. I would say that confiscating private assets in sanctioned coalition countries would be even harder compared to sovereign assets. And also here we need to take into account that each time when coalition tries to progress with the confiscation of sovereign assets, Russia brings this card on the table that, oh, we have all your companies that still have not left the market, they have investments here, they have construction facilities here, this is our backdrop, or I don't know, this is our way of confiscate the same amount of money. So I would stay on the realistical side of this conversation and would be aiming or investing a lot of efforts to confiscate private assets, even though we all understand that Russians should be taken accountable and they should pay for all the war crimes they have committed to Ukraine and Ukrainian nation. About your second part of the question, here I also will add a bit of sober part that there is no magic pill. Still, sanctioned coalition is limited to the selected number of countries, while the big part of a globe still counts that trading and doing business with Russia is absolutely fine. And of course, we can make stricter enforcement. We can force private companies to do proper due diligence. There is also a lot of discussions still ongoing 4 years in a row about using anti-money laundering mechanisms and forcing financial system to check all the transactions, because after 9/11, banking system find out how to check all the transactions not to sponsor the terrorism, and this can be applied to the export controls. However, we still, after the 4 years of invasion, we're still facing the same problems. So I think that there should be always constant process of strengthening sanctions, and there should be constant expanding of lists, especially EU has to move to the regular listings, not waiting for the once a quarter package that is blocked by New Hungary. And not being adopted. So I think that here, the more proactive our partners are going, the better. And there are like multiple of evidence from the NGOs and other analytical teams and legal teams that can supply with all evidences of hundreds and thousands of companies that are helping Russia.
Yes, well, I think that's extremely important and useful information, we would say. Can I go back to Minister Gylfadóttir for a short question, a follow-up to what I asked before around the process of fighting to get Ukrainian children back. Could you tell us if there are glimmers of hope? I know sometimes secrecy is better here, but in terms of some international mediations from actors that could put pressure on Russia to actually, help at least bring some children back quicker.
Yes, thank you for that question. We do have stakeholders, countries that are participating on that front. And I can mention Qatar as an example, and children that have been brought back throughout that kind of mediation. And I would hope that there are more countries that would be able and willing to do so. When it comes to that part, mediating between both sides, that of course here, European countries, the vast majority of them are limited because there's no will to, from the Russian side to have a dialogue or a discussion or mediating with them. But there are plenty of others, and I would hope that we have more players in that regard. And I allow myself to mention the Vatican, for example. But when we look at the numbers of the children that have been brought back, we see that the vast majority of the children have actually come through from the Ukrainian side, from NGOs in a cooperation with other stakeholders inside Ukraine. Therefore, I think that should be our focus, to support them in their work, because they are showing results. The likelihood of us seeing, in bigger numbers, of course, depends on the political will. It depends on the pressure. It depends on our actions. And therefore, I look at my role as, really advocating through the political leadership in European and other friends and allies to keep this on the agenda, to have this, high on the agenda, to always mention it, to make sure that, normal, everyday, normal human beings know that this is happening, know the scale of it, and understand why this is happening and what we can do about it. If we see through any negotiations or other in higher numbers, we have to make sure, again, that the Ukrainian society has the means, the infrastructure, the human resources and so forth to assist them in reintegration and rehabilitation. And here I have to agree very much on the points from President Duda when he talks about recovering in Ukraine, that has to have a clear focus on the trauma-informed care, the psychological support, and the resilience from inside Ukraine that they can achieve if we keep those classes on with that kind of support.
Thank you very much, Minister. Ladies and gentlemen, our time is unfortunately running out, unfortunately because we could continue this fascinating discussion. I think in all the areas we've touched, although so many challenges remain and constantly we are faced with new realities, like for instance in the Middle East, I mean, in all of that, in all of the areas we've heard glimmers of this light that we're looking behind us to the future. So I think, as Admiral Brouwer has said, keep calm, carry on towards that light, and friends should stick together and work on that. And I think with this message, I'm going to conclude this panel. Again, a great thanks to here for David and his company for helping with it, for the invitation from Minister Yatsenyuk, and for everybody around.